It's always a sign of trouble when the band trades in their Schecters for Telecasters, because you know what's coming next: a rock album. What's up, everybody? I'm Finn McKenty. This is the Punk Rock MBA. And you know how you have some of those like, holy crap, I'm old moments? For example, MySpace kids who were into Bring Me the Horizon back when Count Your Blessings came out, they are now old enough to have children in first grade. And speaking of MySpace scene kids, as the internet's leading authority on scene culture, I am here to answer a very important question today. Who were the big four scene bands? Do we go with the Risecore bands like Asking Alexandria and Of Mice and Men? Or maybe the neon pop punk bands like All Time Low and Boys Like Girls? Or is it the brutal kid bands like Suicide Silence and Whitechapel? And more importantly, who is the scene's Lars Ulrich? But first, I want to thank Legacy the Beast for sponsoring this video. Ladies and gentlemen, you have got to check this out. The incredible free-to-play mobile RPG, Legacy of the Beast. And it's completely free. Download it now via the link in the description of this video. Explore the most epic of epic worlds, collect insanely powerful and awesome-looking champions, and eliminate the biggest and most evil bosses out there. It's seriously cool. Create the best team of warriors and take on the legions of darkness in insanely cool, beastly challenges. There's a whole new adventure waiting for you to explore in Legacy of the Beast. Battle your friends in an epic PvP arena and claim your title as the Beast of the Beast. See what I did there? Scream if you were going to download Legacy of the Beast now. This game is a load of fun, and the heroes are some of the coolest you're going to see. So don't hesitate to join the adventure and maybe even join my clan. The name of it is on the screen right now. Legacy of the Beast is completely free on Android and iOS. There's a download link in the description. So if you are after a fast-paced RPG, then download Legacy of the Beast now and receive a daily reward just for logging in. And so, my friends, I'll see you on the battlefield. So first of all, what exactly do I mean when I say scene bands? Well, probably the best way to put it would be any band that could conceivably autoplay on the profile of a kid who looked like this or this in that period of like 2007 to 2014 or so.
So the first and foremost part about being emo is getting that emo hair.
And if you're not familiar with the term the Big Four, that is what they called Metallica, Megadeth, Anthrax, and Slayer back in the 80s, the Big Four of thrash metal. And so the question is, who are their scene equivalents? Starting with Metallica, the big dogs, the band that set the bar for everybody else to meet. This is actually a tough one. In the way that I see it, there are really two possible contenders to the throne here. The first one is All Time Low, who may seem like a surprising choice to you, but actually, I think that they might be the most commercially successful scene band. They have 5 Billboard Top 10 albums, 2 of which went gold. Dear Maria went, I think, double platinum. And most recently, their song Monster was #1 on the alternative charts for, I don't know, quite a while. Which is interesting to me because I don't think I have ever personally met someone who mentioned that they were an All Time Low fan. And looking at my comments and DMs and stuff, I really never hear them come up as some sort of iconic, influential, important band. Nobody says, oh, All Time Low, that's the band that got me into music. And that's not to put them down at all. I think they're a very good band. I'm just saying that it's an interesting dynamic. I think it's kind of like all those butt rock bands like Shinedown or whatever that have 8 platinum albums and hundreds of millions of streams. So obviously somebody is listening to them and buying tickets to their shows. I have never in my entire life actually heard somebody mention Shinedown, despite their commercial success. And I think it's kind of the same thing with All Time Low.
We need to boost album sales this quarter, and you guys are going to be our guinea pig.
And so because of that, I just can't give All Time Low the title of scene Metallica because I just don't think they were influential in the same way as Metallica was. The only artist I can think of that's name dropped All Time Low is actually Lil Yachty of all people. And when it comes to pop punk of their generation, I would almost say that The Story So Far is probably the most influential, who sort of helped take the genre away from that All Time Low kind of sound. Although I will say it does seem like All Time Low is kind of entering their beloved band that got me through my middle school years kind of phase. For example, all those Dear Maria TikToks that were going around.
Mom, it was never a phase. It's a lifestyle. 'cause I got your picture.
And when I asked about this on Twitter, Underoath was another name that came up here, which I would agree with if we were talking about the previous era of alternative music, the kind of mall screamo era. Because remember, during the period we're talking about here, Underoath had already been a band for like over 10 years, so I would disqualify them just based purely on age. But they are a great band that sold a ton of records and they were super influential. And with all of that in mind, in my opinion, the scene Metallica is Bring Me the Horizon. They may not be quite as big as All Time Low, but they're still pretty big. I mean, they've had like 3 gold albums. They sell out huge shows all the time. Maybe not quite as big as All Time Low, but way, way more influential in a way that really reminds me of Metallica in a lot of ways. Because just like Metallica, they started out as pretty heavy and extreme, at least by the standards of the time. And then made a quote-unquote sellout album that some portion of their like super hardcore, uptight, old school fans hated, but was the thing that really helped them break through to that next level of mainstream success and become a gateway band for a whole generation of fans. The Black Album for Metallica and Sepulturnal for Bring Me the Horizon. Both bands have also done some kind of weird experimental stuff. For example, Lulu, the album that Metallica did with Lou Reed. I don't know if I'd say it was good in my opinion, but I think it's cool they did it. Or in Bring Me the Horizon's case, their album of experimental electronic stuff called Music to Listen To, where they did songs with Halsey and people like that. And then there was Metallica's Hairgate scandal, when they put out Load and revealed that they had committed the cardinal sin of metal, cutting their hair. The metal community was furious because metal is all about thinking for yourself and doing whatever you want and not caring what anybody else thinks, right? As long as doing whatever you want happens to mean looking, dressing, acting, and thinking exactly like every other metal band. And Bring Me the Horizon has always had a similar kind of dynamic where there's some small but very, very, very vocal segment of their fan base that thinks they should be like a deathcore band forever and keep making Count Your Blessings, just like there's that segment of Metallica's fan base that wants them to keep making Ride the Lightning over and over and over. And when it comes to influence, there is no band of their generation that made a bigger impact than Bring Me the Horizon. Since the very beginning of the band, they've consistently been like 2 or 3 steps ahead of everybody else, to the point where now I feel like the definition of metalcore is basically whatever Bring Me the Horizon was doing 2 years ago. And speaking of TikTok, they've been having a little bit of a moment on there too. I guess when 30-year-olds start making TikToks about songs that you did 10 or 15 years ago, that means that you've officially made it. And so that brings us to the next question. Who is the Megadeth of scene bands? Who is the number 2 band on the food chain? Ideally with an annoying ginger frontman to make it a perfect analogy, but we'll see if we're able to check that box. Because this is actually a tough one. I think this is not nearly as clear-cut as it was for thrash, or even like in my other video I did about pop punk. My first thought here was of Mice and Men, because they were just killing it when they came out on MySpace back in 2009. Clear standouts. And they probably would have been a valid choice as the number 2 band back in, say, 2014 when they were at their peak. This is when they hit number 4 on Billboard. They toured with like Linkin Park and had turned into really like a legit radio rock band. But that ended up being their peak. They had a lot less commercial success after that. I don't think their music was as good. To be fair, probably because Austin Carlisle was dragging the band down with his lack of musical ability, to be completely blunt. Although, to be fair, Austin does share anti-vax memes, and it would hardly surprise me if he ended up being a birther or a 9/11 truther, so maybe he is the scene's Dave Mustaine.
Called into question where Obama was born?
I know he was born somewhere else than America.
The Devil Wears Prada is another band that kind of comes to mind here as being in the same category. With Roots Above hit, I think, number 10 on Billboard when it came out in 2009. They were killing it on Warped Tour that year. All the kids just loved them, went crazy for them. And it seemed like they were maybe going to break through to that next level of, you know, being direct support for Slipknot or something. But it just kind of didn't happen. And it almost seems like it was a deliberate choice on their part to be less popular. This is when they sort of turned their back on being a scene band and started wearing sweaters and denim jackets in all their photo shoots, looking super serious. It's always a sign of trouble when the band trades in their Schecters for Telecasters, because you know what's coming next: a rock album. And that is exactly what they did. They transitioned from playing metalcore to playing what I would say is like kind of bland rock that I don't think anybody was super excited about. Seems to me like a classic case of a band maybe taking themselves a little bit too seriously, or as I like to call it, pulling a job for a cowboy. And there's also Pierce the Veil and Sleeping with Sirens. both of which had top 10 albums around that same time. And again, it seemed like they were maybe about to break into that next level of kind of semi-mainstream success. But again, with both bands, it was the same story. Their next album didn't do nearly as well. And what's weird is that I really never hear either of those bands being brought up as like an important or influential band. But we do have to give Pierce the Veil credit for appearing in so many rap videos back then. For example, the New Boys video, and of course, the iconic Jason Derulo photo shoot. I still want to know how that happened. Like, did some stylist give him this shirt? Or, I don't know, maybe is Jason Derulo secretly a scene kid who, after this photo shoot, he went home and sang Chiodo's songs into the mirror using his sister's hair straightener as a mic? But anyway, as far as Pierce the Veil and Sleeping with Sirens goes, they were part of that weird moment around like 2014, 2015, where a whole bunch of those scene bands had a similar thing happen to them where they put up big numbers, had some huge album, but then fell off and kind of seemed to not have much of a legacy. Bless the Fall would be another example of that. And it just kind of makes me wonder, who were their fans? How did this happen? Was it just that the labels are really good at marketing that album and so they got a bunch of kids who were into it just for a year and then moved on? I really don't know. It's just super odd to see how they had that breakthrough album and then a year later and almost like kind of disappeared from the scene. What happened to Sleeping with Sirens? Next on Unsolved Mysteries.
You may be able to help solve a mystery.
And so with that in mind, I think the band for this number 2 slot here, the Megadeth of scene bands, is, in my opinion, Asking Alexandria. They've got 3 top 10 albums. They still play pretty high up on the lineup of most of those red state rock festivals. And I actually do hear them come up fairly often as that kind of gateway band that got kids into music back in the day, in the same way as Megadeth was back in the 80s and 90s. Plus, there is a little bit of what we might call the Mustaine factor. Danny can play that role of being the obnoxious frontman now and then, although he never went full Mustaine and turned into a 9/11 truther or a birther. And before I go on, let me just bring up a couple bands that I'm sure a few people will mention. First of all, Enter Shikari. Thrice is another one of those bands, and let me just say, Thrice, Enter Shikari fans, you guys need to chill out. It's a bit much. You guys are at like a 9. I would like you to bring it down to a 3 or a 4. Black Veil Brides is another one that I think is a potentially valid choice. They do have 2 Billboard top 10 albums. Andy's kind of like a minor celebrity who's done a bunch of TV and movie stuff, but I just really don't think that they're particularly influential. And lastly, Attack Attack. A lot of you guys mentioned them on Twitter, and you know that I love Attack Attack, but the fact of the matter is they were just not big enough for a spot on the Big 4. This is a family! Which brings us to the next category, the Slayer of scene bands. Slayer was, of course, easily the heaviest of the Big 4 thrash bands, and so the question is, who is the Slayer of scene bands? And to me, I think it comes down to 3 bands. First of all, Job for a Cowboy, who I think were very influential. I think you could argue that they really put MySpace deathcore on the map when the Doom EP came out, especially Entombment of a Machine, which got millions of plays in a time where that was a huge number. But that was really their peak commercially, and so for that reason, I think they're out. Although they do deserve honorable mention for giving us this iconic moment. I wonder what those kids are up to now. I feel like there's a pretty good chance that at least one of them watches my channel. And the next candidate here is Whitechapel, who have been kind of retconned as like a credible metal band. But if you were around back in the MySpace days, you will remember that they were very much a deathcore scene band back then. If you think of a Whitechapel fan now, it's a dude with a beard and cargo shorts and those unbranded black shoes that I always make fun of because only guys in death metal bands and McDonald's employees wear them. But in 2008, their fans looked more like this. But anyhow, they probably were the most commercially successful deathcore band of all time. I mean, they somehow managed to go to number 10 on Billboard in 2014 with Our Endless War, which to this day still just seems like a fever dream to me. How did this happen? That has got to be the heaviest thing to ever chart that high. However, I'm not sure that they were the most influential, which is kind of the other criteria here. I think they are a very good band who did the MySpace deathcore thing as well as anybody ever did it. Super tight players. Phil is just an absolute beast of a vocalist. But I don't know that they really started anything or added anything super new to the genre, and I really don't hear people talking about them as like that kind of iconic legendary band like they do Slayer. And so with all of that in mind, I would say that the Slayer of scene bands is Suicide Silence. Back in the late 2000s, they were just synonymous with that. Like, I remember metal snobs calling them Cena-side silence because of that. I'm imagining them saying that in the comments of some Metal Archives thread and then patting themselves on the back for that sick burn.
Deathcore is so gay.
Now, I am admittedly biased here because Suicide Silence is one of my absolute favorite bands of this era, and in my top 10 like favorite heavy bands of all time, I would say. And I think that their first two albums are absolute classics that really should be in the Hall of Fame next to Cannibal Corpse and Death, but I don't think I'm crazy to think that. I think the band was that good and that influential. Because there's no question that they were the gateway into extreme metal for a ton of kids back then. Kids who otherwise, I think, would never have gotten into that stuff. Because one of the really special things about that band was that they attracted an audience that was very different from the typical metal fan base. A lot of kids and girls who you would never see at like a Cannibal Corpse or Nile show, for instance, and got them into music that was actually really, really fucking heavy. Like if you listen to early Suicide Silence, it's practically slam. But their shows were full of Warped Tour type kids who would normally never go anywhere near that kind of stuff. Anyhow, I could go on about Suicide Silence forever, but I actually made a whole video about them, which you should watch if you like the band as much as I do. But I really think and hope that they are going to go down as one of the all-time greats. And so that brings us to the last question: who is the Anthrax of scene bands? And to answer that question, first of all, I would say that what made Anthrax so notable is that they were the most fun of all the thrash bands. It's interesting that now, thanks to bands like Municipal Waste and Toxic Holocaust, thrash has been like retconned as this fun, upbeat genre, but it really wasn't. It was actually pretty dark. I mean, Dave Mustaine is pretty much the least fun person on earth. Metallica's big breakthrough video was One, which came out when I was in like 6th grade, I think. And it's about a guy that gets his arms and legs blown off in World War I. It's actually a really intense video. And Slayer, of course, was all about that like super dark satanic imagery. But Anthrax, very different story. You look at their videos from the 80s, and it almost looks like an SNL skit or something with like the shorts and the bright yellow stage design. They also had this character called the Knot Man, which I'm pretty sure is where Wayne's World got the whole knot thing from, which then showed up in like Borat and all kinds of other places. And the other thing that they were known for was their chug riffs. For example, and I gotta say, whether you like Anthrax or not, I know a lot of people are turned off by the vocals. The fact of the matter is that nobody chugged harder than Anthrax back then. I remember Scott Ian was always in guitar magazines back then, talking about the importance of downpicking and palm muting and stuff like that. Along with Dimebag Darrell, he was the person that taught me how to play that kind of stuff, which you can hear if you listen to my like stupid joke slam band. And so to me, it's pretty obvious that the Anthrax of scene bands is a day to remember. I mean, dudes with shorts playing fun songs with lots of chugs. What is a day to remember if not that? And I've talked about them endlessly on this channel, so I will leave it at that, but I think I've made my case. And also, if you haven't listened to the first few Anthrax albums, you definitely should. That stuff is peak thrash. Very underrated in my opinion. All right, my friends, that does it for this video about the big 4 scene bands. Let me know in the comments what you think. Who would you put in the big 4 and why? And before I let you go, I wanted to mention a couple things. Number 1, check out the Punk Rock NBA podcast. If you haven't, there's a link to that in the description. Number 2, please check out my new merch. I have this deathcore shirt with an edgy slogan in impact font on the back, this Pop Punk with Breakdowns shirt, and of course a neon cartoon monster shirt straight out of 2009. You can check that out at the link in the description as well. And as always, I want to thank everyone who supports us on Patreon, especially those of you who support us at the True Cult level or above. It is because of your support that we're able to do a lot of things, but especially the podcast. That's how I pay our producer and editor. So thank you very much. Patrons get every podcast a week early. There's a members only private Discord server that I'm in. I do Q&As. I've done some giveaways recently. There's also a way to have me review your music or artwork or YouTube or podcast or anything else that you would like me to check out. So if you want to support us on Patreon, you can do that at the link in the description. And with that, I'm going to sign off for now, but I will see you next time.